Welcome to Binge Watchers, where we talk about the stories and characters we love and the shows they live in. My name is Ron, and let's talk about Season 2 of the Marvel Netflix original, Jessica Jones. You know, I remember when they only started talking about these Marvel Netflix shows, and we all got super excited, and then Season 1 of Daredevil was actually pretty great, and I was like, they did it! They made it work! And then it's been a rough road since then for these shows. Season 2 of Daredevil had a really good first half, and then sort of went downhill. Luke Cage had potential, but was kind of ruined by a pretty terrible villain. Iron Fist, I thought, was just awful, and The Defenders was incredibly mediocre. And The Punisher was okay, but that was probably my biggest disappointment because that one should have been the best. And then we have Jessica Jones. I really liked Season 1 of Jessica Jones. Jessica is an interesting, complicated character, and Season 1 very much showed us the most interesting part of her life. She's dealing with PTSD from her time with Kilgrave, she's working through her issues, and she's trying to rebuild her life. The season did have some unnecessary side stories, but the main story I thought was fantastic. Jessica was a fascinating protagonist, and Kilgrave was a terrifying villain, and the show just pulled off the whole film noir vibe perfectly. So I was excited for Season 2. And Season 2 tries to hold on to some of the things that made Season 1 special. The story is still very personal. It's not about saving the world. It's more about Jessica and the people around her. It's the aftermath of the things she had to do in Season 1. And not in The Defenders, by the way. Nothing about The Defenders in this show. Like it never happened. And I know a lot of people liked Season 2 a lot, which is great, but I thought that at some point it just completely broke down. The story itself was interesting. We get to learn more about the lab where Jessica got her powers, and we learn that there are more powered people out there, one of which is brutally killing people, and Jessica needs to put an end to that, and Jessica also needs to deal with a competitor who wants to take her business down. There's a lot of stuff going on, which I guess is sort of the first problem. This season is incredibly unfocused. It doesn't feel like there's a main story. It's more like just stuff that happens to different people without a real reason for you to care about some of it. A really unfortunate example of this was Jerry's story. Jerry Hogarth is an awesome character, and I thought she was by far the best performer in this season. But her whole storyline, which is interesting, but the whole storyline felt like it didn't belong in this season. It's not enough for something to happen. I also need a reason to care about that thing, and I need to understand how it fits into the overall story. It's kind of the also this happened syndrome you sometimes see in long-form storytelling. If a side story feels like it has an important role to play in the overall story, then great. Most of the time, it'll be interesting. But if it feels like the show is telling you one story and then just sort of says, also this happened, odds are your reaction will be, so? Even if that thing was a well-acted, contained story. If this was a courtroom drama about Jerry Hogarth, a successful, powerful lawyer in a world where powered people exist, this would have been a fantastic story. But that's not what this show is. This season, like many of the other Netflix Marvel shows, also feels like it really didn't need to be 13 episodes. It actually feels like it didn't even need to be more than 8, because there's actual filler in this season. There are episodes that have zero impact on the story. It's kind of like on The Walking Dead when you know that they just want to buy time, so they're just like, so should we do like a flashback episode, or maybe one of those episodes where we see the same thing happen just from everybody's perspective, and you're like, ugh, it's gonna be one of these. Now don't get me wrong, flashback episodes can be a very powerful tool to help you understand a character better, learn about their motivations, and help you understand why they do stuff. Season 1 had plenty of flashbacks, and they were great. They were important and crucial to the story. In Season 2, I could barely get through the flashback episode because we know all this stuff. They talk about Jessica's relationship with Trish all the time. I think we have a pretty good understanding of it at this point, how entitled Trish used to be, how overbearing her mom is, her drug problem. There was one important thing that happened in that episode. that really didn't require a complete episode, like a whole episode built around it. This season tries to tell an even more personal story than season 1. This isn't a story about the hero versus the villain, but it does feel that these shows, not just this one, are sort of losing sight of the fact that these are comic book shows. And I'm not saying that to take anything away from the show. I love comic books, but the foundation that this show has, the setup that this story has, doesn't really support the heavy drama that they're trying to make this out to be. I feel that The Punisher suffered from a similar problem. They tried to build a complex, personal, and emotional story that's very ambitious, so it feels like they lost sight of something simpler that's needed to make the whole story more coherent. And the frustrating thing, at least to me, is that they already did it. They already made it work with season 1. They told a story about a strong, complicated character. They gave her a love interest without reducing her to just being a dependent. They gave her a high-stakes personal challenge to overcome. It all worked. But in season 2, it feels like they kind of stalled, and other than Jessica and Jerry, I didn't really feel that any of the other characters were especially interesting. Trish's character is going through something interesting in this season, but at some point her character just becomes unbearable to watch. And I think that is sort of how you're supposed to feel about that character, but it doesn't go anywhere. Trish and Malcolm just end up doing the same thing over and over again in this season. Season 1, I thought, very successfully explored deeper themes of PTSD and sexual assault, controlling relationships, and much more. The season 1 effectively made a statement. Season 2 tries to talk about how people manipulate one another, but I feel that the message or the impact sort of gets lost in the mess, so it doesn't really land and it doesn't have the same impact. I did think the season picks up at the very end once they sort of close in on one story and run with it, but that's like episode 9 out of 13. And just before that is where I know a lot of people stopped watching the show, so I can't say it's really worth it. And something that really stood out for me, which is kind of weird in this season compared to season 1, was the writing, especially in the film noir narration parts where Jessica gives some observation about life. They nailed that in season 1, and it was absolutely terrible in this season. My wife and I just rolled our eyes almost at every one of those lines. Other than that, I think Kristen Ritter is a great Jessica Jones. I would love to see her in a more compelling story. I'm glad that we already had that chance in season 1. I think Carrie-Anne Moss is great as Jerry, but her story sort of felt out of place in this season. I would definitely watch the Jerry Hogarth courtroom drama if they ever made it. So, bottom line, should you watch it? You know, I don't think so. I mean, if you love the character and you're a big fan of what they're trying to do with these shows like I am, then you'll probably watch this show anyway, just like I did. But honestly, it's not like this show was tough to watch. There are far worse shows out there. The performances are okay and the show looks great, but it just felt like an unfocused story that had an interesting idea but wasn't able to coherently execute on it. So overall, especially following a pretty good season 1, I was disappointed by this season. I can't say I hate it, I don't, but I also don't think it's worth 13 hours of your time. What about you? Have you watched season 2 of Jessica Jones? What were your thoughts about it? And also just let me know, like always when we're talking about the Marvel Netflix shows, what's your favorite one so far out of the string of Marvel Netflix shows? Be specific, like what season did you think was the best? If you're going to be talking about spoilers, please use spoiler tags in your comments, and if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. It really helps out a lot, and you can find me on TV Time and Instagram and Twitter. Links to everything down below, including our Discord server where we chat about TV, and it's a lot of fun. If you're finding binge watchers for the first time, welcome. I'd like to invite you to join the binge watchers community. Come talk about TV with us. It's a lot of fun. Subscribe to the channel. But in any case, keep binging, and I will see you next time.